Okay, so this is my first clip on the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT, and its replacement organization. Well, actually, technically, the GATT wasn't an organization; it was an agreement. It was like a treaty, so to speak. Then the formalized organization that took over the GATT was the World Trade Organization. Okay, or WTO. Okay, so that's what that means. So GATT stands for General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. World Trade Organization is WTO. And so basically what I want to do is talk about this. I'm making this clip right after my discussion from your chapter 18 material on World Bank IMF, because all of this is sort of subsumed under this sort of bigger umbrella topic of all these international agreements for world trade, basically. Okay. So that's why I did it like that. Alright. So basically, as I said, the GATT is sort of like a kissing cousin of the IMF. It, too, was established in response to the beggar my neighbor situations in the 1930s, the Great Depression time. Right, as I discussed in my IMF video, part of the IMF's role was to stop countries from devaluing their currency unilaterally. Right, so a country, of course, would do that because it would want to, by devaluing its currency, want to then increase its exports to create domestic jobs. But of course, the other countries would see that, and then they would devalue as well, and you would eventually this sort of retaliation to sort of mitigate the first devaluation eventually destroyed international trade. Well, the GATT was the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was also one of these sort of tools to prevent these kind of wars that broke out between countries, these trade wars, and these destruction of international trade. It was, again, it was designed to prevent countries from sort of just basically unilaterally increasing tariffs. So in other words, it was basically a reduction on national sovereignty, in the sense that before all this, a country could pretty much do whatever it wanted. If it wanted to raise tariffs, then it could do that. Now, under this GATT system, they couldn't do that anymore. Okay, so this was to prevent all the countries from jacking up their tariffs to really high rates. Okay, which was also another thing that happened during the Depression. The classic example of this is called, where is it? It's called the, or was called, because it was from the 1930s, was called the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930. And apparently, this was in the United States. It was a tariff law, jacked up all the tariffs, and has been argued as one of the causes to increase or deepen or aggravate the Great Depression. What happened was, when United States policymakers saw that this was not helping, but in fact making the Depression worse, and the reason that was making it worse was because by undermining trade, and because other countries, of course, would retaliate and also sort of fight back and say, well, if you're going to put tariffs on your bringing stuff into the United States, we'll put tariffs on you to hurt your industry. And so from the United States trying to export to other countries now was blocked, so it would destroy American jobs, so to speak. So that's sort of why it was sort of mutually destructive. They started doing these sort of bilateral deals, so the United States would say, if you let us export stuff from our country to your country, one favored industry, then we'll let you do that to one of your favorite industries, and so on. So there was some of that going on. And then out of that emerged this kind of GATT, which is a multilateral deal. So there's multiple countries involved. Yeah, so this whole process is basically called reciprocal concession. So if I give you something good, you have to give me something good back, kind of thing. So if like I said, if the United States does something nice to, let's say, Germany, then Germany has to do something nice back to the United States. And then what doing something nice means would be like removing tariffs or removing other barriers to trade. Yeah, so that was basically the idea. And what it really boils down to is sort of like a big gigantic, how can I put this? It's like a big gigantic sort of international talking club, so to speak, where they basically, all the diplomats from the major countries of the world would get together and they would sit around and talk about what they can do to grant concessions, to reduce tariffs. And then, of course, they also got later on into other sort of non-tariff trade barriers. So like quotas were attacked. Those voluntary export restraints, right, were also attacked to be removed, basically. I mean, these are, of course, all about trade liberalization meetings. And the way they ran them was in what are called rounds, the GATT rounds. Okay, there's been, I think, 9 of them, I believe. Maybe that's changed. Because they tried one in Seattle, but it ended up with all these protests. So it kind of shut it down. But I guess, so for example, the one there was one called the Kennedy round, which was in the 1960s, the Tokyo round in the 70s, and then they had the Uruguay round. And what these are basically is they're basically like they start out these sort of like, they open up a round of negotiations. So from my notes here, the Uruguay round, for instance, lasted 7 years. So 7 years of political negotiation, all these diplomats talking. And basically they would have offers and counter-offers and so on. And it started in 1986, actually, and it ended in 1994. So that's what they mean by the round. It's like they open up this sort of negotiating session, and then it drags on for multiple years. I mean, the final agreement with all of its appendices, and for the Uruguay round, for instance, was 22,000 pages long. So these are huge documents with all these appendices and backing up documents. So that's why it takes so long to write these things. And of course all the negotiating and wheeling and dealing, and there can also be threats and counter threats, like it can. So that's why it takes so long. And so that's what ends up happening. So ultimately, I just want to squeeze this into one clip, is basically the Uruguay round also saw the creation of this World Trade Organization. This it also it created these sort of dispute settlement mechanisms. So if the WTO reaches agreements, then they can enforce them. And it also looked at rules pertaining to foreign investment, rules pertaining to intellectual property, which is that business law stuff in your textbook, Appendix A, for foreign investors, and also for rules about trading and services as well. So I think that covers everything I want. The last thing I want to mention is the sticking point in the whole GATT WTO thing pertains to agriculture and protection of agricultural products. Canada is one of the protectors. The other one was Europe, with what they call the Common Agricultural Policy. And for instance, when they converted the quotas in Canada to tariffs, they were like 300%. That's how high the tariffs are on some agricultural products. And the plan seems to be eventually to phase them all out. And so that's basically the idea of these WTO GATTs, is to prevent countries from jacking up tariffs unilaterally and encouraging them to reduce them all and eventually eliminate them for free trade, basically. And so that concludes my clip, and just under the 10 minutes. Very happy.